Hello, Sioux Falls School District community. The following is a brief presentation that will walk you through the current middle school and high school boundary options. Going to start with middle school. Currently, there are two middle school options out for public comment. They are middle school option A and middle school option B. If you recall, back in 2018, we convened a task force, facilities task force, to look at whether the district needed to pursue building additional facilities. And through the task force, it was determined that the district needed a new middle school and a new high school to accommodate both future growth, but also some overcrowding that was happening in some of the schools. The recommended school size for middle schools was in the 1,000 to 1,100 range. And so the task force made a recommendation to move forward. A bond referendum was done and the money was raised. And so now we are in the process of building a new middle school and a new high school. The new middle school is named Ben Rifle and is located on the southeast part of town. And so when we went to create the boundary options, that's the school that we started with to try to come up with a accommodation to fill that school up. Our target population was about 900 kids for that school because the southeast, according to the city planners, is still an area where much growth has to happen in the district. And so we wanted to make that to allow for some growth. So the Ben Rifle area, really, we were able to accommodate that by moving Harvey Dunn, Cleveland, part of John Harris, and the majority of Rosa Parks into that. Our goal as a district is always to try to get as many elementary schools to feed in their entirety to middle schools if at all possible and keep those cohorts together. In the case of middle school option A, we were unable to move all of John Harris into Ben Rifle because that would have put them right at capacity and allowed for no growth. And so what we did in this option was we split John Harris right at Southeastern Boulevard there. And so the eastern half going to Ben Rifle and the western half of that school population going to Patrick Henry. Next, moving up to Whittier, with the addition of Ben Rifle, we moved Cleveland Elementary School out of Whittier, and then part of Rosa Parks, which you can see over here on the far right. That area there used to be in Whittier and now is in slated to go to Ben Rifle. So that moves some kids out of Whittier, and so to backfill for that to some extent, we were able to move the other portion of LBA into Whittier. LBA was previously split between McGovern and Whittier, and so now with this change, we're able to accommodate essentially all of LBA feeding into Whittier. Moving over to Patrick Henry here, we were again trying to get the right population of around 1,100-ish kids into that school. And so with Patrick Henry, we were able to move all of Robert Frost and all of Susan B. Anthony into that school. And if you look at the map over here, previously that was split. We had part of Robert Frost attending Edison and part of Susan B. attending Edison. So with this change, we're able to accommodate having both of those elementary schools feed into Patrick Henry in its entirety. With the moving out of part of John Harris and Harvey Dunn, we also had room to move Hawthorne into Patrick Henry. And additionally, in order in this scenario to adequately balance between Patrick Henry and Edison, we in this option are moving the honors program that currently is in Edison into Patrick Henry. In today's environment, both the Spanish immersion middle school program and the honors program, both are at Edison. Those cohort combined are roughly 500 kids. And so in this scenario, we're choosing to move one of those into Patrick Henry. Moving over to Edison, you can see in scenario A, we are moving the JFK area into Edison, which was previously, it currently attends Memorial. And then we were, as previously mentioned with Patrick Henry, we moved the partial of Robert Frost and Susan B. Anthony over to Patrick Henry to keep those cohorts together, and then the honors program, as was previously mentioned. Taking a look at McGovern, really the only change to McGovern is that we moved Hawthorne over into Patrick Henry and moved that out of McGovern, really from a proximity standpoint, closer to Patrick Henry. And we'll make George McGovern temporarily a little smaller because, as the city planners have told us, this area up in here is where most of the growth still has yet to occur in the city, and that's where the future growth will. And so eventually growth will fill George McGovern. Now, taking a look at Memorial. Today, Memorial, our projections, if we do nothing, are that it's going to be a school of over 1,400 kids. And the fact of the matter is it's over 1,300 now. And going back to the task force recommendation, and the reason we built a new middle school is to keep our middle schools in the 1,000 to 1,100 range. And so Memorial becomes a tricky area in a sense. You really have four distinct areas that make up Memorial today. You have the JFK area down in here. You have the Pettigrew area over here in the southwest. You have the Oscar Howe area, and then you have the Discovery area. Those four areas make up the current Memorial attendance area. So if you're going to make Memorial smaller into what the recommended size for the district is, you have one of those four areas in which you need to move. And so and the boundary task force looked at many options. One option was looking at Skip, Bessing, Pettigrew up to McGovern. Really not much you can do with a lot of the Discovery area because it's in walking area of Memorial. You have Oscar Howe, and then you have JFK. And so in this scenario, to keep a cohort together and to right size the school, we simply have JFK moving into the Edison attendance area. And historically, I believe that area was once part of Edison. And so that allowed us to essentially move the Memorial school area down into the 1,100 range, which is more consistent with where we want those numbers. And so essentially that wraps up middle school option A. We'll move on to middle school option B. And the biggest difference between middle school option A and middle school option B, for the most part, is the way that we choose to divide up the current Memorial attendance area. And in this scenario, in option B, we're taking a portion of the Oscar Howe area, the non-walk area really or the closest area to what would be Memorial, and we're choosing to bus that up to McGovern since they would be bused over to Memorial. So the task force felt that was a acceptable plan to be, at least to be considered and open for community input. Now, the other area that we have looked at is the area that is west of the T. Ellis Road. And in this option, we have those areas moving over up to George McGovern. And the reason is that T. Ellis is a natural boundary, and we've also acquired land out here from the Lenox School District that will eventually fill up. And so it will be impossible for that area to essentially move that area into Memorial as well. We know that that area really is going to have to go up to George McGovern. And so it's natural then to move these three areas that are currently in the district along with this up to George McGovern, the George McGovern attendance area. Now with this change, we're moving JFK out of Edison, and again, Oscar Howe up to McGovern, and that allows for some capacity to fill in Edison. And so in option B, we have moved the honors program back into Edison from Patrick Henry, and now in option B, they would both be at Edison where they are today. That created some, moving the honors program out of Patrick, created a little more room at Patrick Henry. And so we, in this scenario, we're able to move the Lowell area, part of the Lowell area into Patrick Henry. It's really the non-walk area. The part of Lowell is a walk area to Edison, so we didn't want to move that. Additionally, there's a little bit of Garfield that we were able to move as well to really sync up the estimated population between Patrick Henry and Edison. So that is option middle school option B, and again, the biggest difference is how we divide up the west side over here, or the memorial attendance area. Now, one thing we've heard a lot about in our feedback sessions or the Let's Talk app and submissions that have come in through that is a lot of people will reference that they live in a certain radius of the current Memorial Middle School. So why are you not letting us attend that area? And so here's a visual that kind of allows you to see a couple different radiuses. So the inner circle here is a 1.6 mile radius of a Memorial Middle School. And when we look at the population just within the 1.6 miles, that's 990 students. And so you can see, though, that brings in only a part of Pettigrew, part of Oscar Howe, most of Discovery, and actually brings in a part of Hayward into the school. So you would be basically fragmenting most elementary schools if you were going to use a sort of a radius to determine what population went to Memorial Middle School. And then we also looked at a 2 mile radius because we heard that as well. And you can see a 2 mile radius actually would not correct the overcrowding situation at Memorial. It would leave the school at roughly 1,400 kids. And you can see you still have the same issue. You're bringing in only a part of Pettigrew, part of Oscar Howe, part of JFK, part of Hayward. And so that just gives you a little bit of reference as to when you hear reference to radius and how close folks are to a school. And that's really the reason, the purpose for this slide here is to kind of point that out. So here's a summary look at the two options, middle school option A and B, side by side. You can see most of the schools on the east side stay the same in both scenarios, whether it's Ben Rifle, Whittier, Patrick Henry, for the most part, and McGovern. There's some small changes, but most of the change is really here on the west side with JFK, and then also where the honors program is located. In option A, it's located at Patrick. In option B, it's located at Edison. And then down here, you can see where the numbers come out. So again, we were trying to, at this bottom chart here, you can see after the specialty allocations, you can see Ben Rifle, we hit our 900 mark. Edison, we're at about 1,100 where it is today. McGovern gets slightly smaller than it is today, but again, that's where the future growth in the city is, and so we're allowing for that. You can see Memorial in both options. We're getting down at least into the 1100 range as opposed to the 1400 range that it would be projected at. Patrick Henry, we're able to hit the 1,000 mark, 900 to 1,000 mark. And then Whittier becomes a little smaller as well, being that part of that school was really moved over to Ben Rifle. And so that gives you a sense of the balance that we're able to achieve under both middle school option A and middle school option B. Moving on to high school, we have moved forward with two high school options, high school option A and high school option C. And I'll start with high school option A. And again, really the goal of the district, like with elementary schools feeding middle schools, would be to try to keep cohorts together as much as possible. So feeding middle schools into high schools. Of course, we know that's virtually impossible when you end up with 6 middle schools, and for high schools, you have to have some of them split. So in high school option A, we really match that up with middle school option A. And in this scenario, we have basically Ben Rifle attending Washington High School in its entirety, Patrick Henry into Lincoln in its entirety, Edison into Roosevelt in its entirety, and then George McGovern into Jefferson in its entirety. So then the two schools that we're splitting are Whittier, which would be split between Washington High School here and Lincoln High School. And then we have Memorial, you can see that would be split between Roosevelt here and George McGovern, or excuse me, Thomas Jefferson. Now, one of the things that we've heard on high school option A is that in this scenario over here, we're breaking up Memorial, and essentially Memorial is split between Thomas Jefferson over here, and it's also moving to Roosevelt. And so the reason for that is simply we need to get 1,800 kids into Thomas Jefferson High School. Our recommendation from the original facilities committee and why we went forward with the bond referendum to build a new $90 million high school was we wanted our high schools to be in the 1,800 student range. And so, again, we're trying to right size all of the high schools. One of the things about the Jefferson area and where it's located is you can see off to the northeast, you have the airport. There's really no kids up there. There's very few kids up in the northern part of that boundary. And then down here, just down to the southeast, you have the country clubs and the green area here where there's really not many kids either. So in order to get enough kids into Thomas Jefferson High School, you really have to move some kids up from the Memorial area up to Thomas Jefferson because they're the closest to the schools. If we start moving kids from over here, they're farther. And so that's really part of the reason that we arrived at the boundary scenarios that we have. So again, just to review, you can see all of Ben Rifle into the Washington area, which is outlined by this line here. You see Whittier, that is partially in Washington and partially in Lincoln. You have Patrick Henry in the Lincoln area in its entirety. You have all of Edison into Roosevelt. You have all of McGovern essentially into Thomas Jefferson. And then again, you have Memorial split between Roosevelt here and Thomas Jefferson. Now, we did originally have a option B, but option B was so similar to option A that we essentially removed that from consideration. And then based on feedback from Let's Talk and from the Boundary Task Force, we came up with an high school option C. Now, option C is really the highlighted by the change over really on the Roosevelt area. And option C, if you remember, it used to come down and skirt down here, follow the Discovery area. Based on some feedback, we had some of these folks that were very close to the school, and so we essentially made the line between Thomas Jefferson and Roosevelt. We made that 26th Street as more of a natural boundary, and so that was one of the changes that we made in option C. Another change was that we essentially moved this area over here into Lincoln. This strip here between Western and over towards Minnesota was previously in Roosevelt in the first option, and so in this option we moved it into the Lincoln area to try to make that area a little larger. And then we flattened off some of this boundary up here, and so used more of a natural boundary to create the boundaries between Jefferson and Roosevelt and Jefferson and Lincoln on the northern part of both of those schools. And then also, since we were moving more of these kids up here into Roosevelt, that in option A were attending Jefferson to fill up Jefferson again, we came over here and picked up some of this area that we previously had going to Lincoln. So when you look at high school option A and high school option C side by side, again, you can see the major differences between the two are this area here in option A. We have going to Thomas Jefferson. Over here, we've preserved some of this into the Roosevelt area. And then this area here under option A going to Roosevelt. In option C, we've moved that boundary over, and this strip over in here goes into Lincoln. And then you can see this Jefferson area, since we moved part of this back to Roosevelt to keep Jefferson at the size we wanted to, we moved part of this back over into Jefferson and out of Lincoln, since we moved this into Lincoln. So when you look at the numbers portion of where each high school comes out under each scenario, you can see we have to take into account open enrollment. So we're able to come up with a base head count based on the cohort that we know will be attending, what the attendance area of each kid is. And so we can see under option A what the base head count is. And you can see in option A, Lincoln is quite a bit smaller than in option C. And so in this scenario, we were trying to accommodate open enrollment. Now we know Lincoln has the most open enrollment today as far as kids coming into that high school, and so we accommodate that. We don't know exactly what the future of the open enrollment will be at all of the high schools once all is said and done and we get through the transition years, and so but we've made an attempt to at least account for that in our attendance scenarios. The other thing I would point out on the high school options are that the New Tech school that's currently located on the STI campus will be located at Jefferson High School. And so that school accommodates between 300 and 400 kids. And so we know that will be part of Jefferson, and they will relocate over to Jefferson High School. The other thing to note would be that you see two measures of capacity. You see an FTE capacity, and then you also see it as head count. And so we know that many of our high school kids attend the CTE Academy on a daily basis. We also know that there are other kids that attend other schools like Joe Foss and scenarios like that. So essentially, head FTE is really becomes less than head count. There's a factor there, and so when we look at our capacity, we try to look at both numbers, both head count and FTE. So when we look down here at our open enrollment post-open enrollment headcount, which is probably the truest measure when we're trying to right size these schools, we can see that in both option A and option C, Jefferson High School, when you take the base Jefferson High School and then layer in New Tech High, they are right in the 1,800 head count range, which is where we want them to be. Lincoln High School, since we're using a current open enrollment scenario, in other words, we're basing future enrollment on open enrollment on current open enrollment, you can see that their numbers are slightly higher, but we fully intend that that school is going to have to manage their open enrollment down into more of the 1,800 to 2,000 range. So we fully expect that to happen. And then you can see Roosevelt under both scenarios in the 17 to 1,900 range. So again, a lot closer to the 1,800 number that we're trying to achieve. And then Washington is right on in both scenarios. So those are the two high school options that are out for comment. Hopefully this has given you a little bit of the details or science behind how these boundaries that have come up for review. Again, both middle school and high school options. They're and we started with a couple of base scenarios, and we've been working those through the task force through the feedback that we've that's come through Let's Talk, and then of course the community input sessions that will be coming up. And so we welcome the feedback as we move through this process, and eventually these will move on to the school board for consideration, along with all the comments that that we have heard along the way. So thank you for taking time to listen to this presentation.